Hello and welcome everyone to the Brooklyn Rail's 958th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Peter Freeman and Phyllis Tuchman. We are thrilled to welcome poet Emily Martin here to close today's program. And now to get started, I will introduce today's guest and host. Peter Freeman founded Peter Freeman Inc. in New York in 1990. The gallery represents leading international artists and the estates of several generations and has always represented historically significant works in conversation with contemporary artists. Freeman also publishes scholarly books, including a catalogue raisonné, Robert Mangold early works, as well as the first monograph of Catherine Murphy, among others. And our host today, critic and art historian Phyllis Tuchman, teaches and writes about art, particularly sculpture. She has taught at Williams College, Hunter College, and the School of Visual Arts, and we are very lucky to have her as an editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail. Thank you both so much for being on the NSE today, and with that, I will pass it over to you, Phyllis.
Thank you so much. Peter, welcome. We're lucky we're not in Miami, although the weather is not delightful, but what can you do? Peter, I was wondering, when you were in college, did you study art history?
I did. I applied to colleges thinking that I would pursue archaeology just because you kind of had to have a thread to make a good application. I ended up going to Harvard and as a freshman took a pass-fail class from a list of courses that were supposed to be non-threatening so that you could explore a bit. And Stuart Cary Welch, who became one of my real mentors, one of the great connoisseurs of our time, gave a class every Thursday night at his house called The Connoisseurship of Objects. And we would sit on his carpet in front of a 8-foot Gustave Doré landscape, and we would pass around from maybe 12 of us from hand to hand, just objects that Cary owned. And he was a great Islamicist. He was a real expert on Mughal painting and collected himself ancient objects from Tibet, from Greece, from every culture, and with an extraordinary eye. And somehow I grew up looking at art and never thinking about it in this way, and it completely lit a fire that sent me to art history, and that never left. The fire never died, and the interest in art history and objects never left.
Wow, that sounds like a great course.
It was fantastic. Half the people were on the Harvard football team looking for an easy pass, though the whole point of it, it was something, I was class of 78, and the idea was to keep Harvard from shifting to be totally pre-professional, which by now it probably is. There was still some idealism left from the 60s to promote educating a worldly citizen, and literature and art history was certainly part of that.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Oh, can we go back? We could, yeah, perfect. So I met you when you worked at Blum-Hellman on 57th Street, and Irving Blum is famous because of his connections in Los Angeles and all the artists he showed. And certainly Hellman was a terrific dealer. At one point, I remember this big article in a business magazine that said he was going to be the next Leo Castelli. Can you think of what you learned from the two of them that is still part of how you approach being a dealer?
Well, when I actually, while I was still at Harvard, I took a summer job as a intern at the Detroit Museum, and Barbara Haskell had curated a show that was touring 20 museums that was American art in the mid-70s. And then she was hired by the Whitney, and she came to Detroit to install the show. And it was what John Copeland's used to call jet art, where artists had to get on a plane to come and install something. And that's where I met Mel Bachner, who I now represent. I met Richard Tuttle. We're very close friends to this day. And I met Barbara Haskell, and she was so pleased with working with me there that she hired me at the Whitney, and I was at the Whitney for 3 years and didn't really know what to do because the director then made it quite clear I would never be a full curator without a PhD, which is not true to this day. But I believed him, and I was looking around for what to do and was actually offered a job to be curator at the MCA in Chicago, and offered a job to be the director of a gallery that was going to move from a small townhouse in the Upper East Side to a huge space on 57th Street with the ambition to kind of take over the art world. And frankly, I didn't want to move to Chicago. But the choice to stay in New York was accidentally the choice to leave museums and to go to galleries. And the kind of museum thinking and the interest in art history never left my brain entirely, but to work for Joe Hellman and Irving Blum was extraordinary. Irving gave Warhol his very first show, Lichtenstein his second show. Irving didn't start Ferris Gallery, but he famously continued it. Joe Hellman was from the next generation, and as part of the kind of satellite of the Castelli system of having galleries in different cities, Joe was in St. Louis dealing with the next generation and doing one of the very first shows with Bruce Nauman, working with Richard Serra from the beginning, working with Richard Tuttle. So you had these two dealers that outside of New York, one in LA and one in St. Louis, had really helped to kind of define two generations of artists that were absolutely essential. And I learned a lot from them. There were also a lot of relationships there. Blum-Hellman represented Ellsworth Kelly, who was an extremely close friend until he died. I still work with Richard Serra on projects. It was really a formative kind of experience. And after 10 years, I decided I would much prefer to start my own business, which I did with the wonderful timing of starting in 1990, about 5 minutes before an economic crash in the late 91. So I cut my teeth in a difficult moment, which has certainly been repeated at other times to this day. But it taught me a lot, I think.
Wow. And you were in Soho, if I'm
I was in Soho. My wife then had a gallery called AD, which was doing editions with artists of usable objects like a chair or a screen or a table. She wanted to kind of leave that and right about the moment when I wanted to make a space. I was dealing privately before, and what I was really missing was making exhibitions. And so finally, though I started in 1990, finally in 97, I made my first exhibition, which was something I was quite proud of. It was called The Ideal Object, and it was a 19th century American sculptor, Hiram Powers. I think maybe the first slide, if you go back to it, is that. So Hiram Powers were what he called ideal busts, and they were from 1848. And the Warhol boxes were from 1964. And it struck me that the Warhols and the Powers were exactly the same object made by the same culture 100 years apart, basically. That what Powers was trying to do in his ideal bust was absolutely the same thinking as what Warhol was doing, making the boxes. And since this time, there have been many, many shows and attempts to kind of make mashups between styles and periods and cultures. And a lot of times, I think they end up being just mashups. What was, I think, important about the show that I started with was that there was a real thread of thinking to get people to see that these were the same objects. And there was something very exciting about that. And my first show got a great review in the New York Times. And when Art in America reviewed it, Carter Radcliffe did like a 6-page story rather than just a review. So the response was wonderful. And it was a great way to kind of make me regret having waited so long to start making shows. And I continued to make shows and really loving it, and finally representing artists and making a real combination between representing a living artist and helping to nurture and grow their reputations and careers, but also keeping a thread of what history can still teach us or reveal to us, and objects from another period that still speak to our period, which has always been something very important for me.
Well, I'm curious about your choice of the word ideal, the ideal object. Do you feel that Warhol's boxes were idealistic?
It was, I mean, it wasn't, it was the word ideal came from Powers, that he referred to these busts of goddesses that as ideal objects. And actually what interested me about them, from being from 1848, they predate the kind of Victorian veneer of emotion that came later, which I find a bit cloying and not very interesting at all. There's something very beautiful about how the Powers sculptures kind of sit in space. They're very sure, they're very definite, they're very forward, they're full of power. They're wonderful objects. The Warhols, I just felt, was in 1964 a way of expressing what a perfect shape could be, a perfect image, something that would represent something about a culture. And in that sense, I thought that they were the same objects.
I'm kind of curious. Hiram Powers, he's like somebody you expect to see at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Have there, to your knowledge, have there been any other art galleries in New York City that have shown Hiram Powers?
Well, usually someplace like Herschel and Adler, that was the great, Gallery of American Art, and showing Hiram Powers as the great 19th century sculptor who was and I think also 1848 was the star of the Crystal Palace exhibition in London, and probably the most famous artist at that point on the planet. But what was interesting for me was to bring that aesthetic and that thinking into conversation with contemporary art, and not leaving it in a kind of a defined niche, but making it speak to us. It's not that I became a Hiram Powers dealer. I didn't. I now represent another 19th century artist that we'll get to later in this talk, Medardo Rosso, an Italian who actually was making work so radical in the 1880s about material, about abstraction, that you almost couldn't have Bruce Nauman or Thomas Schutte without that foundation of an artist exploring material and image the way Rosso did. And for that, it's exciting to be dealing with the family, with the objects, and helping to sort out a very complicated history of the work that has been confused for years by posthumous casts, which I don't think are interesting because you need the hand of the artist, and outright fakes. And Rosso, when the Museum of Modern Art reopened, in the first room, there was Medardo Rosso. And when you walk into Reina Sofia now, in the first room, there are 2 waxes that they actually bought from my gallery. It's fantastic work. And it's exciting for the artists in my gallery to have this in context with their work. The artists are always responding to the kind of dialogue that can happen when there are unexpected objects from another place or even another time in the gallery, that it can be exciting to learn something back and forth between understanding the new and going back and looking at something older, or understanding older things and seeing the new in a different way. This
Peter, thank you so much, because this is why we enjoy having the NSE, so that we can hear explanations like the one you just gave. Can we go back to the sequence? The fourth.
Mm.
So I am not that familiar with Helen Mirra.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me something about her and how you found her? Do you go to studios? Do you have artists send you slides?
She's Helen Mirra is an artist. I should know her exact age, but she's in her 50s. She was born in Rochester. She taught at Harvard for a long time. She now lives just north of San Francisco in a very small house overlooking the Pacific near the Muir Woods, where she can walk meditatively, which is very much a part of her practice. She's an artist who is from a generation that was dealing with the ideas that came out of conceptual art, with the use of material and transforming experience and material into works that can speak in a way that reveals experience and also reveals structure. I discovered her work by seeing it actually at the Cologne Art Fair, probably in about 2000, when that was one of the best art fairs in the world. And her first gallery was Meyer Rieger Gallery in Karlsruhe, Germany. And I was just completely struck immediately by a drawing I saw there, and took home, and then sought her out, and with the help of her German gallery, got to meet her and talk to her. And she ended up being the first artist that I represented, which was very exciting, and made the first show of her work in New York. A work like this were salvaged pieces of wood from shipping pallets that were painted with milk paint in different colors of kind of brown and green that were responding to landscape. Walking through the landscape and walking generally has always been a part of her process. When she's done shows with me in New York, she's often organized kind of participatory walks where, with a group of people, she would walk backwards for 3 hours and then have lunch with everybody. Or she would send people I think they all met at a cemetery in Brooklyn, and they all walked for 4 hours to a different destination to meet again, but they had to take different paths, and then talk about that experience and learn from that experience. And the work itself is something that should help to reveal the world. I think all good art is something that should change how you see things, change how you understand things. And the work in my gallery, which doesn't follow a particular style, doesn't follow a particular period, there are artists that work in many, many different ways. If there's a thread through it, there's certainly a conceptual thread through it, but also this idea that the experience of the work is something that should change your experience in the world. And that's very exciting to me.
Oh my God. We forget that art does things like that. It changes your life.
At its best, it's supposed to.
Yeah, thank you. Now, and I'm going to look out for her work now. That was fascinating. So Matt Mulliken, you just showed somebody who works outside of San Francisco. I think of Matt Mulliken as a preeminent Los Angeles artist. Did you get on a plane and go there?
Matt's a preeminent pictures generation artist who came out of CalArts, was a student of John Baldessari, and his classmates were people like Mike Kelly and Jim Welling and Cindy Sherman, It was an extraordinary group that the Metropolitan Museum made a great exhibition of a few years ago called the Pictures Generation. Matt left LA a long time ago, was in New York all through the 80s. I'd never met him then. These are pictures of a show that I made with him in the gallery we had in Paris. And Matt was actually living in Berlin for a long, long time and splits his time really between Berlin and New York. And I first got to meet him through my partnership with Philip Nelson in Paris, who had started a gallery earlier than I did. He started in 1982. I started in 1990, and in 1993, he moved to Paris. Sadly, Philip died of a brain tumor. And actually, two of the artists in the gallery there, Thomas Schutte and Thomas Roof, asked me to continue the gallery, and eventually it became under my name. But Matt was one of those artists, and we became great friends. And eventually I was representing him in New York because when we started, he had other galleries in New York. But Matt is a workaholic. He's constantly making things. It's extraordinary scales. This is a picture of something that's so big you can't even hang it up in the gallery, so it's half on the floor. He's dealing with symbols, with representations of the world, with ways of reorganizing the world, and it's absolutely constant. He had a show a couple of years ago at one of the largest spaces in the world, the Pirelli Hangar Bococca in Milan, and I think he said there were 10,000 works in that space, and it was kind of full and wonderful and perfect. He also had a show at Haus der Kunst in Munich, which is famously also a difficult space to use because it's so large, and Matt made it look kind of perfect. It's great work.
Were you surprised when his stepmother turned out to become a much praised artist?
At 90 something, she was fantastic, and she would, even in a wheelchair, come. She came to Matt's opening in Milan and was with us all there. She was always an artist, but Matt's father was also a famous artist, and his mother kind of stayed in his shadow a little bit and never stopped making work, but really wasn't showing it. And it was fantastic for everybody that she, in her 90s, I think she died at 99, she was immediately, after a Serpentine show, on the Time magazine list of 100 most influential people. I mean, what a fantastic ending for a full life. It was great.
Absolutely.
Matt's children are also artists, so there's 3 generations of Mulliken artists.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And are they painters or object makers?
Painters. Lucy Mulliken just had a show in London. It's great. But Matt is he's constantly reorganizing the world in different ways, like as if the world is a deck of cards with images on it, and he's constantly redealing that deck and finding different ways of making things. He was one of the very first people to deal with invented imagery that a computer could make some 30 years ago. He's constantly testing limits of how you can re-see things, and it's always exciting.
Wow, too much. The next image is going to be Mel Bachner, and the word paintings were so surprising. It's almost as if words replaced coins.
These paintings, the thesaurus paintings, this was the first show I did with Mel. Maybe I've been too polite in my days, but I've always wanted an artist to show with me rather than me trying to convince an artist to join the gallery. Mel was one of the first artists I met. He was one of the artists that came to Detroit when I was there in '76. And when I went back to Harvard, I had him do a cover for a magazine that I was publishing as an undergraduate, a poetry and literature magazine. So we have a long friendship, Mel and I, but he was with Sonnabend, and at one point he said he wanted to leave Sonnabend and would I show him? And of course, I said yes, and this was our first show. These paintings were later shown at the National Gallery in a fantastic show of the thesaurus works, where the first word of the painting there is crazy, and all the other words that follow are synonyms of crazy, but in a kind of a perfect order that often gets funnier as you go through it. Sometimes throws in something that's naughty. I own a painting that could not be in the National Gallery show because it had the word fuck in it, and the National Gallery was not going to hang that. So, you know, Mel really reveals language in a wonderful way, but he had from the beginning, Mel's first words were used in portraits of artists that he made. He made a portrait of Sol LeWitt, a portrait of Eva Hesse, of his friends that were kind of geometrically organized visually, but they were all made out of words. And he did that at the same time as measurement things. And so somehow language and measurement from the beginning have always defined Mel's work.
I love it. And can they go over your couch?
Well, you can see how big these are. You would have to have a very high ceiling, I suppose. But I mean, Mel plays a little bit with a great color sense that certainly can be very pleasing to live with. And he has a great touch when after these very fine paintings with a hard edge, the paintings got looser and looser over the years, and they've gotten drippy, and its language gets obscured as it kind of actually starts to add over itself and repeat over itself. So he's really played with clarity in seeing and difficulty in seeing, and clarity of meaning and multiple meanings that come when things maybe aren't so clear.
Wow. You make me want to revisit all these shows in person. I'm enjoying this so much. Now we do come to Medardo Rosso, and these look like the wax works.
These are all cast wax. This and the Bachner show before were in the first space we had, which was on Broadway and Prince Street on the 6th floor above Dina and DeLuca, which was once a gallery building. These Rosso works, the one in the middle and the one on the right, were the two works that we sold to Reina Sofia. The one on the right actually came from a family of the turn of the century art critic Wiesel, who hated Cubism and was kind of famously against it. He liked Rosso. They were friends, and Rosso gave him that work. So it had a wonderful, wonderful history. And I had sold a Rosso to the Art Institute of Chicago, and the family that owned the Wiesel piece saw the piece in Chicago and looked at the provenance, and then called me out of the blue saying they had a funny blob of wax in their living room from their grandmother, and could I come and look at it? Would it be interesting? And it was a great rediscovery of a lost piece, and is now in Madrid at Reina Sofia.
Oh my God, you're kidding. In mentioning selling to an institution like Reina Sofia or the Art Institute of Chicago, can we just momentarily revisit the new movie about the Trois Gros restaurant by Frederick Weissman, which is playing at Film Forum for the entire month of December? I think you mentioned to me that the art in their acclaimed Michelin restaurant is you sold them the art.
Most of the art in the Trois Gros restaurant is actually from the gallery by Thomas Schutte, by Sylvia Bachley. They're great friends through French connections. One of, as I said, I did the gallery in Paris originally with Philip Nelson, and Philip's help in that gallery came from the Robelin family, who had originally had Bama Gallery, which in Paris was extremely important and had the Robert Filliou estate, which I now represent. It was Sigmar Polke's first gallery outside of Germany. It was extremely important, showing Dider Roth and a whole generation of artists. But the Robelins grew up with the Trois Gros in Rouen outside of Lyon. Phillips started his gallery in Lyon. It was all part of that place. And so I'm very lucky being very close with the Trois Gros family, and admire them immensely, because I think there's art that can happen in the very few restaurants that aspire to not do something pretentious, not do something silly, but to, again, having a meal at Trois Gros, you never feel that it's pretentious. It's comfortable, but you're eating something you've never eaten before, and you're thinking about food in a different way. You're learning about your senses in a different way. And I'm glad to say also, when you look up from your plate, you're looking at art, which I think is nice, which came from the gallery mostly. So it's a nice combination.
Oh my God, I can't wait to see the art in the movie.
It's a 4-hour movie and it's worth it.
Yeah. So Thomas Schutte, I had read that you had wanted a larger space so that you could show his sculpture optimally.
That's true. And we looked for a couple of years and finally found the space that we're in now still. We've been there for about 13, 14 years. And this, Thomas was very smart. He wanted to have his first show with us there in the raw space. So it was completely raw. We built a couple of temporary walls. The large woodblock prints in this image are on one of those temporary walls. But he loved the fact that everything was kind of semi-destroyed and that the sculpture could just stand on its own within this space. And he was quite smart about that. And it was a real pleasure to find a space, which I think we've made one of the most really beautiful spaces in New York. And Thomas really help see it. These two wooden sculptures, Krieger warriors, are made out of wood that's been kind of carved from using a computer blowing up a small piece. And these are owned by the Museum of Modern Art now. They bought them from this show. And this coming September, Thomas will have a full retrospective on the top floor of MoMA, the entire 6th floor at MoMA. And that'll be quite exciting, because I think he's really one of the best sculptors of his generation in the world now.
And I mean, I saw one piece, I felt it was a melting mile. It's kind of astonishing what he does with figures.
Well, he was a student of Richter's at the Düsseldorf Kunstakademie. So just the way Matt Mulliken comes out of a certain teaching milieu at CalArts, Thomas is part of another group that came out very strongly from the Düsseldorf Art School. And Thomas's classmates were people like Thomas Roof and Thomas Struth, all of the Düsseldorf School of Photography. They're all the same age and they were at school together. Thomas, being Richter's teacher, was trying to deal with how to make art that didn't have to be abstract, was going back to the figure. And very quickly, Thomas was interested in a figure that could embody a sense of emotion where you're not quite sure what's happening. You're not sure whether the hero is sinking in mud or whether it is a hero, or the warrior is somehow still alive when half the body seems to be withered away. But, you know, what kind of warrior is it when it's a bottle cap for a helmet and just a stick for what he's holding in his hands? So, you know, are they toys? Are they real? What are they representing? And they go back to, especially when Thomas makes something big, a whole very complicated genre of monumental sculpture, which was taken away by authoritarian governments making monumental sculpture that kind of wasn't allowing anyone to deal with something that scale, I think, until Thomas used that scale, but started to kind of question the very authority that was usually working at that scale. And there was something quite brilliant about that. And the work is very, very powerful, very present, and often very moving. for how he does that.
Is he based in Berlin?
No, Dusseldorf. He went to, he was from Oldenburg, which is a couple hours north of Dusseldorf. And when he went to school, he never left. There's a group of artists, I think, that all went to school in Dusseldorf and never left.
Oh my God. It's yeah. I love Dusseldorf. Now we're about to show another aspect of your gallery. It's a very varied group of people. I consider Catherine Murphy one of the great realist artists of our time.
I think she is. She's 75 years old. Just interestingly, for how this looks so different from Thomas's show, this was the show that followed Thomas, and it's been cleaned up. The ceiling's been painted. The space looks a little bit more respectable, but we still haven't finished. We still are building the space, which is why there's two doors that you would now see on this central wall that you're looking at that aren't in this picture, because they're just, the space has been sealed off while we work away building more. But I wanted to do Catherine's show. So Catherine is remarkable for being an artist who is painting only by observation. So she's setting something up to paint just by looking. She never paints from a photograph. She never paints from memory. In fact, she often paints from dreams. But when she has a dream, she has to then set it up. The painting on the left, which I love, if you can see it well enough, it's a polka dot dress lying on a bed. And she dreamt this image, but she didn't own a dress like that. So she had to buy one, but she couldn't find one. So she bought the fabric and had someone make the dress. And then she had to drape it on her bed and spent 6 months painting it. The insanity of painting all those polka dots on the dress in perspective so that they're correct was remarkable. It's a fantastic, fantastic work. And she also has been a very influential teacher. She taught at Yale. Actually, when Mel Bachner was teaching at Yale, she was there. She's best friends with Martin Purrier and both Mangolds, who live quite near her, near Poughkeepsie. She's making work which, though it's always dealing with an image, is dealing with the subject matter issues that all artists are struggling against. Questions of figure ground, questions of representation of material, questions of abstract organization. The painting on the left is owned by the Art Institute of Chicago. It's called Gift Box, and it's just an open box with all the tissue, but what came in it is kind of missing. But it's so much about abstract painting for how it's organized. It's about abstract sculpture. And I think there's something very satisfying in the work because it's playing with imagery and the issues that we all grew up with through conceptual and minimal art.
Wow.
This couldn't be more different. This is Franz Erhard Walter, who's a German artist, 10 years older than Catherine Murphy, in his mid-80s. And Franz also was at the Dusseldorf Kunstakademie, but a couple of generations before Thomas Schutte, and he was the student of Joseph Beuys. And his classmates were rather remarkable also, because he was in the school with Richter, who ended up being Schutte's teacher, and also his classmates were Blinky Palermo and Sigmar Polka. Franz was always the outlier in that group because he wasn't dealing with imagery, he was dealing with materials and abstraction, and he was making art by piling paper on top of each other just to make a block of paper, or making two cardboard tubes that you would hold in your hand and then pass to somebody else. The art became very interactive, and he was interested in how people and art could change each other, so that this piece on the floor, you're invited to come and rearrange that. It would all kind of fit together to make a a shape, or you could rearrange those shapes and arrange them in any way you wanted. And he wanted that interaction. One of the people that followed Franz was Franz West, and West's first works, the Pastücks, were exactly that, where West would make a plaster sculpture that he would want people to pick up and hold and then put someplace else in the gallery. And that all comes out of Franz Erhard Walter.
I love seeing these as objects because I'm much more familiar with his performance work, with people getting in garments that almost look like oh God, I forgot what you call what
like worker smocks or things out of night paintings.
exactly. I mean, I saw a performance at the Modern, and obviously at 112 Green Street he did performances for Performa just now.
Yeah.
Are these object-oriented works well known?
The first works that Franz did like that, they were called, there were 58 sculptures that he called Werksatz, the work set. And there were 58 sculptures that you would take out of a bag and then you would activate them. What I also find a little bit amusing is that Franz says the work tells you how to activate it, but when he's with you and you start to activate a work, he'll go, oh, no, don't do it like that. You really should do it this way. So in fact, even though he wants somebody to kind of do what they do with it, he also has a very clear idea of how he thinks it should be done, which is kind of cute. But it's an important way of making art that I think combined performance art and conceptual art and minimal art in a funny way all together. Franz brought some of that thinking with him when he came to New York in the 60s, but I think being in New York in the 60s also was very influential on him when he was here meeting people like Judd or Eva Hesse or all the people working in New York at that point, interested in material, interested in performance. Franz just always did it very much in his own way.
Wow, I wish these works were better known. I'm kind of intrigued because Richard Wentworth, I know his work through Richard Deacon, the next slide. But I always associate Richard Wentworth with like cutting up a washing machine, and this is much different.
Cutting up the washing machine, I'm blocking on the name of that artist, but he would take a washing machine and cut it up with shears to kind of turn it into the shadow of a rabbit. That wasn't Richard, but Richard was taking like galvanized pails and stacking them up into a different kind of geometric shape. But Richard always took photographs. And in fact, Hans-Ulrich published a fantastic book of like 1,000 of Richard's photographs. And so we wanted to do a show in the space of the photographs and use those tables to do it. This actually isn't Richard. These are drawings by Charlotte Posenenske that have appeared on the screen, which is another estate that we represent of a German artist who also was very involved with performance art in the 60s, making works that she wanted people to rearrange. And it was very much like Franz Erhard Walter in that way. And Dia did a fantastic retrospective of her work about 3 or 4 years ago. And she's had a real renaissance and revival, which I hope the gallery has really helped make happen.
I love her work. I thought the Dia show and what they have kept up since is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Is she still at work today?
She died a while ago. She actually left the art world in the early 70s, late 60s, when she felt that her desire that art should not be sold at a profit, that anybody should be able to have art by being able to order it and buying it at cost, making kind of industrial looking geometric objects with car body paint on it that anyone could take home and hang up. Now we love these pieces, and they're made to order in open-ended edition without any sort of limitation. We love that now, but I think in 1968, it was a bit beyond the understanding of most workers to want to take those home. And she wasn't so thrilled that somehow the gallery system and the people wanting to buy the work didn't really support her ideal. And she left the art world. She became a professor of social history and stopped making work at a certain point on a very kind of making a very honorable position, I think, against the art world.
Wow. So you show her estate and these open-ended objects that you can be responsible for that?
Well, sadly, her widower also died just 2 years ago. And he had decided that when he would die, that the open-ended editions would end, because he just wanted to be sure that the quality would always be there. And though he trusted me and trusted her Berlin gallery to continue the quality control, he just thought it was much easier if he ended it. So actually, you can no longer order those things.
Whoa, too much. Because that Dia show was extraordinary.
Yeah.
The next image is oh,
Mangelos?
yeah. I'm sort of intrigued. It says a retrospective of exhibitions.
Well, this was I think our third Mangelos show that we did. We were one of the first to show Mangelos, absolutely the first in America to show the work. He was a very important art historian in Zagreb who was kind of secretly making art and was part of an artist group called Gorgona, which is quite famous, which was working to make art and push art ideas both in a radical way within the art world, but also it very much was a kind of a political position. Yugoslavia was interesting, where Tito was much more open to the danger of artists doing what they do, whereas in other communist countries, you would just be in jail. So Yugoslavia was an interesting place. You had people in the 60s like Yoko Ono and Bob Rauschenberg and Manzoni visiting Zagreb, and there was a great dialogue going on. Mangelos was taking common objects, found objects like book pages. These are globes. These are just sometimes bits of wood off the street that he would obliterate by covering with a black or white or red, and then introducing a new layer of meaning by adding language to it. And the language was often chosen from 6 different languages. He even liked using the Glagolitic alphabet, being a little bit amused that, like Cyrillic, it was invented at a time when the Bible was being dispersed to new populations. So the language was invented for that. But Cyrillic is still used in Russia and other countries, whereas Glagolitic is completely forgotten. Nobody in Zagreb can read it. So he could, as an artist, write in Glagolitic, but kind of smile that absolutely nobody could understand it, which was kind of great. But when we were doing our third or fourth show, I wanted to do something that would be different. And he had other retrospectives. And so what we did is we did a show that was kind of revisiting the shape of those other retrospectives, which is why we called it a retrospective of exhibitions.
And Peter, how did you first see his work?
It was one of those wonderful accidents that happen not every day. There was a wonderful young dealer named Rainer Burgermeister in Berlin who was a great friend. He sadly died in a car accident. And I was visiting him. We had a wonderful dinner. I think we were talking about Broteers because he was showing Broteers. And we went back to his apartment. We were having a last drink, and he opened a drawer to show me something that we were talking about. And whatever he was getting in the drawer was no longer interesting because next to it in the drawer was a drawing that I just thought was astounding, and asked what it was. And he said Mangalos, and that meant absolutely nothing to me. And within 2 months, I was on a plane to Zagreb that he had arranged and meeting the family. And we were the first people to show the work here. And the Museum of Modern Art bought, I think, half of our show. There was a great retrospective in Europe that happened a few years later, and suddenly Mangalos was on everybody's radar, and we were selling work to really every major museum because it was a missing part of the history that was quite essential.
Oh my gosh. Oh, fascinating. We're returning to Matt Mulliken. With the are these banner paintings?
These are sewn banners, and he filled the space with them, and then between the banners made these tables on which he covered, I think, 1,200 collages. And what he did is he took a copy of C.G. Jung's Man and His Symbols, a book that we all grew up with in my generation and Matt's generation, and must have had 2 copies because he cut out every single image in that book and put it on a page with an elaborate kind of calligraphic page number, and also writing the chapter headings out, and turned the book into this huge display of the images removed from the book. And it was a fantastic installation which filled the gallery. We didn't sell it in this show, but we showed it another time just in a stack, that all of these pages were in a tall stack, and sold it then to a museum in Europe, which was kind of great. So it now has another home, a permanent home. But it was just so interesting to have 2 totally different iterations, one on one single table and one spread out filling a space.
I hope some of the people listening know when you say filled up the gallery that your gallery is huge.
Well, it's huge, but I hope it's generous in a way that 3 things can fill it if they need to, quite small things. Or Matt has completely covered the walls. In this picture, each of those paintings on the wall are on 2-meter square canvases. And in the very, very middle, you have the black and white painting, and then on the top to the right, you have more black and white. That's actually one painting. So my space may be huge, but it was not huge enough for a 6-meter tall painting to even fit. But Matt thought, oh, it doesn't matter. We'll just put the top of it to the side. That painting's now owned by the San Francisco Museum, and luckily they have a wall that they can show it all.
I love it. And he's part of your gallery, right? I mean, you can show him.
No, he's an important part of the gallery, and really important in so many ways, and just the connections between different generations. Like I was saying, Mangalos is dealing with kind of language and symbols. That's the heart of Matt Mulliken, and the idea of performance that is in the work of Franza Hart-Walter and Charlotte Posenenske. Matt also has a performative aspect to his work that's tremendously important. When we started, Helen Mira and her spending a month walking, and each day coming back and doing part of a weaving, reflecting on the landscape she was walking through. All of these artists work in so different ways, but I do find it interesting that within the gallery, you find very specific connections in terms of how artists are looking and how artists are presenting work, even if it all looks very different, the thinking often has really important connections.
I love it. I love it. And we're returning to the Medardo Rosso bronzes. I never think of his work in bronze.
Well, he cast unique works always, never made additions. And sometimes he would cast in plaster and he'd leave it as plaster or paint it. Sometimes he would cast the waxes. People think that the waxes are somehow hand carved. They're not, they're always cast. And then sometimes he would cast in bronze. And each material choice is very different in its presence. And I think that's why he did all three. It wasn't that one was a lesser choice because he couldn't do another. Thomas Schutte is an artist that is very similar in that way, where he'll work in ceramic or glass or bronze. And those choices are made because he can do something quite different with the material and to the surface. And that's why I think Rosso, again, is such a foundation for contemporary art. He was a contemporary of Rodin. They're fantastic Rodin sculptures, but you wouldn't think of Rodin being essential to Bruce Nauman or material sculpture like Eva Hesse. Medardo Rosso is, and that's why it's exciting to have it in the gallery.
Oh my God, that's when I get really envious at people who work in galleries because they get to see this all the time. Knock on wood, it's great. So now we're going to show one of my I reviewed this exhibition for Art Forum. Part of it related to Judith Stein's Richard Bellamy biography. I mean, Dead-Eye Dick was one of the great people I've known in my life. I mean, he was fascinating. He was a great dealer. And you had the gallery just filled with artists who he exhibited. How did you find all this stuff?
He was a labor of love. Dick was amazing, where in this picture you see on the floor a Richard Serra lead roll that actually Dick had sold originally. He was one of the first people to sell Richard Serra's work. The gray rectangle on the right is a plywood painted piece by Robert Morris. He gave Morris his very, very first show. He did the first show with Oldenburg, and the blue pair of pants is the very first soft piece, the very first one. It's a Joubert painting on the left, and I'm sorry to say I'm blanking on the name of the artist on the back wall because she was wonderful then, and that was a painting we borrowed from the Whitney, but she completely disappeared, and you never see the work. I didn't even know the name before this show. I'm embarrassed not to. Someone's reminding me Jean Follett, so that's very nice of have that reminder. Dick was somebody I knew. I'm very close friends with his son, Miles Bellamy, who's great. And I admired Dick for being true to the art. And I would hope that that's also how my gallery is, where we put the art first and the artists first and try to really support what they need and what they want to do. And if we're representing an artist, it's not for a show or if they're popular in the market. It's, I hope, for decades, whether they're selling or not selling, because we believe in what the work is. And Dick was very much like that. And the Green Gallery that he had, which only lasted a few years, was one of the great places of seeing new art that stayed with us, that's really remained influential. And so it's a pleasure to do this show. Judith's book coming out was one impulse to do it. Being good friends with Miles was another. And bringing together some works that are forgotten, some works that are familiar, some works that were important then and less important now, but seeing how it all fit together. And for me, it was a real reminder of how galleries can work for artists rather than work for the market.
Well, I'm familiar with Jean Follett because of my long friendship with George Siegel, but just looking here on the floor, um, somewhat beneath the Rosenquist, Gary Keane. I mean,
Yeah.
Gary is kind of disappeared now.
He's still around, and he's wonderful. And he had a big retrospective of work at the Liechtenstein Museum. Oh, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, with a big fat book. So there's been a kind of resurgence of interest in him.
Well, and isn't that a Dan Christensen to the left of the Rosenquist?
Yes, it is, and that's actually a painting which has gone to the Dallas Museum, so it's got a nice future ahead of it. There were a lot of very special things in this. The gray works hanging one above the other were metal printing plates by Michael Heiser, and there were portraits of Bob and Ethel Skull, and the skulls were the backers for Dick Bellamy's Green Gallery. Skull being one of the first major collectors of kind of new art then. And when they sold their collection, famously a marker of how the art market kind of became an art market. So they were both a blessing and a bane, but important to the history.
Well said. Absolutely well said. Now, we're going to have some images. You asked Alex Katz to organize this group show. Are these people who, I think Alex donates work to museums? Are these artists part of that cohort?
Alex is extremely generous, and he's constantly looking at young artists and supporting them. He does have a foundation which has given a huge amount of art to Bates, mostly, I think. And I just thought, because he was constantly looking at things, that it would be fun to ask him to do a show of paintings. And he did. You can see over the desk on the wall, there's a list of the artists in the show. There must have been 100 artists in the show. And it was fantastic. And the idea was that the artist would deliver the work. It was kind of an old-fashioned operation to make this show. And it was great. And then Alex, with his foundation, bought, I don't know, 20 works out of the show. So they all got donated to a museum eventually. And he had fun, we had fun. It was really special.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And the next is a group show with an astonishing yeah, look at these names.
Well, this was dealing with COVID. The gallery wasn't quite open, and sometimes it was illegal to be open, and then you could be open, but with 10 people, and we didn't want to be working at home. We couldn't have a show for 6 weeks anymore, so this lasted longer than that. I mean, those dates I think are not quite right. I think it actually lasted longer, but it was a way to have the gallery active. And the black rectangle is one of the very first earliest Richard Serra Belgian linen pieces, that's black oil stick paint on Belgian linen that's stapled to the wall. And the bits you see of metal on the floor to the right are Franz Walter, the piece that you would stand on and become the sculpture. And then the bronze chair in the front of the Serra is a remarkable cast bronze chair with all of the kind of foundry detritus still attached to it by Elisabetta Benassi, who's a wonderful artist from Rome that we've recently taken into the gallery, and she'll have her first show in America in January.
Well, I am going to open the door for that show. I'm looking forward to it. This and I mean, this looks like that Nauman is to die.
The Nauman is to die. It's an outdoor piece in cast iron that was one of the tunnels, but meant to be outside. The candle piece is Richard Serra. It's one of the earliest Richard Serra works. A found beam on the street drilled so that you can have candles which would melt and mark the passage of time. That's a piece that's now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. And then the folding table has a counting piece by Mel Bachner that's using matchsticks, burnt matchsticks, to make shapes, first out of 2 matches, 3 matches, 4 matches, 5 matches, almost like a bar game, but a bar game probably between he and Solowet at Max's Kansas City.
Wow. And this is obviously a view of the top of the Guggenheim Museum, I would think.
It's a computer invention of an archive library that doesn't exist anywhere. It was a remarkable thing that Fiona Tan did. She was working at the Getty at looking at archives and was kind of fascinated by archives. And so she ended up feeding a design into a computer that invented a building that this film would take you through. She's a filmmaker that's usually using a camera. This is the other half of that same show where she's made a movie at a museum in Belgium that's in an old factory building. And one film has a digital projection, and then the other film facing it has a 16 millimeter old-fashioned film projection. So they're not quite repeating the same imagery, but it's filmed in the same building. And so it's playing with different technologies and how in film those really give different visual presentations.
And that exhibition was also during lockdown.
No, this wasn't. I don't remember this being during lockdown. Somehow we were free to gather a bit more. It was a challenging time, whenever that was.
Yeah, that's for sure. So Alex Hay, I remember from way back when. I'm unfamiliar with these early works. I'm more familiar with the bags, but how did you come to show Alex Hay?
Also a wonderful fortuitous story where when I was working at the Whitney, I had a salary that was embarrassingly pitiful and couldn't afford easily much of an apartment, but the very cheap rent-controlled apartment below my godfather and above Kiniston McShine on an old townhouse building opposite Grace Church was becoming available, and Robert Rosenblum was the tenant. And I had to be interviewed by Rosenblum to be allowed to pay the fixture fee for his kitchen and move into this apartment whose rent I could actually afford. And I passed the interview, and on my way out, I said, it's wonderful to meet you. We hadn't met before. I love seeing your Jasper Johns and your Liechtenstein. Who is this painting opposite the door of a like a Denison label with a red edge that I who is that? And he said, Alex Hay, and it didn't mean anything to me. And about 10 years later, I saw another Alex Hay of a cash register receipt in a German collector's house and realized it was Alex Hay, at which point it was just crazy that there were 2 fantastic paintings by someone I'd never heard. And I figured out that all the work was owned by the Rauschenberg Foundation because Alex gave it to Bob on his way out of town, and that Alex had left the art world. He had started showing at Castelli. He was represented by Joe Cornbly back in the day, was doing amazing things in the 60s, like these paper bags, one of which in this picture we borrowed from the Whitney to do this retrospective show. And I met Alex when I decided to do the show of 60s work, and he was just about to start painting again. And his first paintings in years were in the 2001 Whitney Biennial. And I've been representing him ever since, and he's just one of the great treasures. He's 94, 95. He
Wow.
is working every day. I'm sorry to say his partner passed away yesterday, which was very traumatic, his wife. So it's not an easy time for him now or for us, because that's very sad. But Alex is truly one of the great artists.
Peter, I am enjoying how you find these artists, that you show them, that these shows are extraordinary. I would become one of your clients. So thank you.
Tell your friends, thank you.
I can't thank you enough. We're going to show one more artist from 2022.
Fernanda Gomez, one of the great Brazilian artists. She's in her 60s. She lives in Rio, working in only kind of found materials or natural materials of wood, always painting white when she's using a color, somehow playing on a history of Brazilian and South American abstraction that in itself is coming out of a European history of geometric abstraction, but doing it with such a deft understanding of material and touch that it's just immensely pleasing. This was the first show we did with her. She lived in the space during the summer when we're closed and made almost all of this work in situ. And it was a real joy. It was picked by, I think, Roberta as one of the best shows of 2022. Every year about this time, the New York Times does a list of, the 10 best shows, and there were 8 museum shows and 2 gallery shows, and this was one of them. It was, we were very proud of that.
As you should be. Peter, we've gone 15 minutes over time, but I have enjoyed this so much, and you've been talking this whole time. I cannot thank you enough. And now we're going to go to the Q&A, but really, this has been fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phyllis, and thank you so much, Peter. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing so much about the amazing gallery. We do have some questions from the audience, and the first one I will ask on behalf of GE. GE wrote, Peter, how do you consistently dial into finding and showing work that never seems in any way to be derivative? What is your secret?
The good part of that is that I am never following the market. The bad part of that is that I'm just always trusting what moves me. So the trick is to keep your eye open to looking so that you're not picking things that are only familiar and picking something that looks like something else. But it's really finding something that I believe in. And it means I miss some things. It means that I see things so late that I can't possibly have it in the gallery because a million other people figured it out while I was pondering. It's not always the best way to do things, but it does give me pleasure, and I hope it makes the gallery interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. And thanks, GE, for sending in that question. Our next question will be from Babs. And Babs, I will allow you to unmute.
Hi, thank you. This was just wonderful and fascinating to learn all this. I'm going to go back. My question is going to change maybe a little bit, but my original question was about the pedestals, the use of pedestals in the ideal object exhibition. And then I started noticing the use of pedestals in some of the other installations when you're using when you're bringing in older works, and as a installation artist and sculpture artist myself, I'm always conscious of the space and what pedestals do in space. Maybe it's my little hyper reaction to it, and how it's sitting there, what it's doing. And my original question was, how are those pedestals impacting the bust that's sitting on it? How are they impacting the Warhols that were sitting next to it? And then I noticed also in the Mangold piece, you had these pedestals and you decided to do them in a staggering height. You know, what was the decision behind that? And the square use of the pedestal, and then the rectangle or the really large use of a pedestal. I mean, these are decisions that everybody makes when they're putting a show together, especially if there are busts involved or old sculptures or small sculptures, and you want to bring them up to the height. But I always find that these have an impact. Especially, and then I'm looking at these other images that you're doing by artists who are doing complete installations. So could you talk about how you came to that decision for the choice of pedestals? Because you used a black one and a smaller, thinner pedestal in the ideal objects, and then you use these rectangular pedestals that also had a base that made them more architectural and made them feel like they were a part of they almost felt like a body below the bust.
Well,
So at any rate,
mostly,
sorry. Okay, I'll let you answer.
Designing pedestals is a little bit like framing. There's a million ways to do it, and at its best, you kind of want the frame or the pedestal to disappear so that you're looking at the art and not the pedestal. With the Powers and the Warhols are right on the floor as they originally were, and there were no pedestals. With the Powers, there aren't a lot of 19th century choices that you can pick that don't somehow start screaming 19th century, and you start looking at them, and I don't know, it just brings in a whole nother aspect, which I didn't think you needed when I was interested in just looking at the sculptures. So we just tried to have anonymous sculptures, anonymous pedestals that you would forget about and just see. That's certainly true for when we've shown Mangold's globes and when we've shown Medardo Rosso busts. And the variance is just to be sympathetic with what's on it, and also sympathetic to encountering a group or a room of things where maybe if you vary things, again, you can start to see things individually rather than just having it merge into one thing. And what's always interesting is to try to support the work so that you see the work individually without interrupting that experience.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks, Babs, for that question. And we did get some other great questions today, but unfortunately for time, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So thank you so much to everyone in the audience who sent really thoughtful questions. But for now, our final question in the Q&A will be from Fong. So Fong, if you would like to unmute.
Yes, thank you so much, Eleanor. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Phyllis. This can go on forever. I can just listen to it. It's so terrific. And I just wanted to say, add into what you was when you mentioned Alex Foundation, Peter. He given a lot away to several museums. You mentioned Bate, but the main museum that he been given gifts to is Kobe.
Yeah.
Because he have an Alex Cash museum there, you know.
Right.
And of course there's High Museum, then there's Portland Museum, and several others. It's remarkable. And he keep it incredibly discreet, quiet, how he go about ways to support artists. But you know, your program is just what exactly those questions would like to ask that Phyllis already did ask, so that's terrific. But you mentioned about his, further older art. I remember, was it in 2006 or 7 when your gallery was still on Broadway, 506 Broadway? And I remember coming in and was completely floored by a show of James Ensor. And I meant to ask you, how did you manage to get those paintings together? I mean, I seen marvelous show there, Richard Wentworth, you mentioned Fiona Tan and other, but that show was out of the blue.
It was a nice thing. I was doing a lot of work in Belgium around Marcel Brothers, and in Belgium, a lot of people collect Brothers, a lot of people collect Ensor. Those are the two. I mean, obviously Magritte also, but I just kept encountering Ensor. And when we did that show, it was the first painting show in New York of Ensor in 30 years. It was really quite something. And what interested me is not just the early Ensor, but Ensor through the time. And when MoMA later did an Ensor show, it was a little bit disappointing that they it's as if his last 30 years of work didn't exist, which I think was too bad. One of the paintings that I had in the Ensor show, we ended up selling. It was a late still life that was absolutely fantastic, and we ended up selling it to Jasper Johns. And I felt so vindicated that someone like Jasper, with the great eye he has, would understand the worth in a 30s still life of shells, that yes, it was repeating a 19th century image by Ensor, but painting in such a different way that it had its own pleasure. And that's important.
Yeah, I mean, there are images of the installation that somehow stay with my memory. It's carving quite powerfully, but it didn't surprise me that Jasper would buy that painting whatsoever. Well, congratulations, Peter. Thank you for being who you are, your vision. And this is delightful. Can't wait to go back and listen to it. So thank you again. Thank you, Phyllis. And back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Phong, for that great question. And huge thanks again to Peter and Phyllis for the wonderful discussion today. We have a tradition here at the Rail of concluding our events with a poetry reading. And today I am so thrilled to welcome our poet, Emily Martin, to the stage. Emily Martin is a writer and teacher from Brooklyn. Her most recent chapbook is called Dependence, the Joysticks / How You Are Made, from Hiding Press. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all so much. Can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I remember that Catherine Murphy polka dot dress painting. I've seen it, and it also really stuck in my head. So it was great to see it again. Thank you so much for having me. I love these events, and I'm glad to read a very short poem. I'm going to read a small portion of a longer poem called Variant Time, which I had the honor to read here at the Brooklyn Rail last year. And I'm always self-conscious about repeating myself at readings, but I feel called to read this new version of this short section again today because it is an attempt to think about my own Jewish identity and to think about some of the relationships between Judaism and writing. I'd like to state explicitly my belief that Judaism is a truly radical practice of study, which is rooted in reading and writing, in debate and infinite midrashic interpretation, like poetry, and is therefore antithetical to any original or transcendental claims to land. Of course, we have the right to be safe. And as the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, I truly mean that. But any so-called safety that is contingent on the denial of someone else's right to safety, the expulsion of someone else from their home, is not safe at all. So this poem is dedicated to all the other Jewish people who reject the political, colonial, and supremacist project of Zionism, and who are in unequivocal solidarity with the people of Palestine, with the people of Gaza, with the people of the West Bank, with the people of the Palestinian diaspora. We are many, and we will keep each other safe. I will begin my reading by saying Happy Hanukkah and Free Palestine. Snacks, water, cigarettes, praise, validation, exaltation. The edges where exchange happens on the last day of the year. Echo through valleys and nodded elations of people and places and lovers and sunlight between those that endure to bring you into the world. Flock of seagulls in the evening flies over the fragmentation that turns toward life. It's not beautiful, but it is lovely. Appear here in this habit to take up the space as you bloom from a tablecloth. Thread the continuous seams that appeared as horizon of a meadow flooded with shallow pools reflecting the sky. As if a tract of land can ease, impulse grab a cupped hand, it cannot. Heron in the pool of reflected sky, it cannot. Say it, and still it is not so. I keep telling myself two things. One, it is an honor to feel this. And two, they're doing psychological warfare to us too. The safety of empire is not safe at all, and the entrance of history into God is the shattering of empire's safety net, the disillusion. And when the sprawl of suns settles nothing, but it is not explained. Do you really do that? You are trying to teach me how to live by what feels like destruction in this world, to recognize a presence through the gap left between books on a shelf. You tell me of orchards embroidered in glass on the wall of a room made from mending and wandering, down hallways that tilt through sky and soil and don't bear, now or ever, a dwelling for more than a song or a night fixing marble nets. Let them run off, they all are in a way. It's the thing that keeps us. Lid folded under lid, going around to our different stations, calling out what we want, our insistence, our deference. Still after all this time, and I want to impress you. A secret that doesn't belong to anybody. We can only see parts of it. When I cover my eyes over candles on the table, I can hear in your voice you say to me, and we do really trust each other so much. At night, in the mulberries, you've hidden gifts on different levels, and all those people are a part of you. You're made up of them, and still they surprise you, what they're drawn to, Kayla knowing the church. And now it is no longer winter, the sparkling, deflated balloons, plastic bags in the branches get their privacy back, and you enter the threshold every day, just limping, but not in despair. They told us that everything scary had already happened, that it was over now, and we could all just live our lives. And we are. In the snow, I beg you, from now on, the world has only just begun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for those words. That was a really, really incredible reading. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you again to Peter and Phyllis. And thanks also to Anna and the team at Peter Freeman Inc. for helping us out with preparing for today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE and helping us make these conversations possible, and for supporting our archive, where this conversation will be shared shortly. And please help us keep the rail free. We are fundraising $200,000 this season to directly support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and operations for the coming year. As a small nonprofit, we need your support, so please donate with the link in the chat and support us. And join us at 1 p.m. tomorrow for a conversation with Sarah Reisman and Christina Yang on the event of Drawing as Practice at the National Academy of Design. We will conclude with a reading by Sally Fullerton. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you for being here today, everyone. Thank you, Emily and Peter and Phyllis. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That
Peter.
was so
Thank you,
wonderful.
Phyllis. Peter, thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you,
Beautiful
Peter.
reading.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Emily.
With much love
Bye.
and peace, you all.
Bye, everyone.
Happy
Bye.
Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Yes.